Okay, welcome back. What we're seeing right now is some video surveillance at the Greyhound bus terminal. I should let you know in the Baptista case they are out to lunch, so there's no reason to be on lawandcrime.com. You should be right here with us at this trial. Get into that chat room. I got my awesome guest, Gene Rossi, with me. Gene, hashtag 4041 for all those points you shot as an all-state basketball player, DOJ, 3-decade career, multiple trials, prolific trial attorney. The Gene Rossi War Room still exists there down at the DOJ. That is such a great honor. Very impressed. And it's great to have you back, my friend.
It's always good to be back.
Yeah, so, Gene, some surveillance video in this case that we're watching in Godejohn. Now, the co-defendant in the case, which is Gypsy Blanchard, who was the daughter of the victim in the case who was killed. Her mother was killed, and it was a conspiracy between Godejohn, who was the boyfriend of Gypsy Blanchard. Gypsy Blanchard has pled guilty, received a 10-year sentence, and the government is going after Godejohn for the full enchilada, if you will, the murder conviction. And right now they're showing tape of the post-murder scene at the bus terminal. So we have some time to talk. Let me just ask you real quick, Gene, if the jury finds out about the 10-year sentence for the daughter, if they do find that out, what are your thoughts? Because I've gotten that out before as a defense lawyer in a co-defendant case, in a homicide case, as a matter of fact, and I could see the jurors kind of like wincing a little bit when the prosecution then goes in and looks for a maximum sentence on murder. Any effect here?
Yes, of course it would have an effect. And I got to assume that she's not going to testify, Bob. Is that right?
I mean, I don't think we're really sure at this point.
Well, if she does testify, as you know, that should be brought out on direct examination by the prosecutor. That's part of her plea deal. But if she doesn't testify for the prosecution, I would file a motion in limine to keep that out from being presented to the jury.
Right. Let me just interrupt you, Gene. I'm sorry. Just so our viewers know, they're getting out of the terminal now and they're going inside of a cab. I just want to narrate a little bit of the video there. I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead, Gene.
No, but if she is not testifying, and because this is not a death penalty case, they can't put proportionality into evidence at the sentencing. But if she doesn't testify, Bob, I don't see how that's relevant that she got a plea deal and got 10 years. However, if it does come out for whatever reason, that will definitely hurt the prosecution's chances of getting first-degree murder.
Right. As a prosecutor, I wouldn't be calling her because I don't think I need her, given the statements that have been made, especially the interview that he gave, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. But just so our audience knows, because I know especially those in the chat room, they love to get into the weeds with the law, the nuances and the trial tactics. Nobody better than you to discuss that with. I do think it gets out, at least the way I've done it as a defense attorney, is towards expectation of benefit. In other words, Judge, I need to bring out that she got a 10-year sentence if she, in fact, testifies for the prosecution, certainly to show that she has a motivation to testify on team government, and she's saying whatever they want in exchange for that sentence. I'm sorry, one thing, Gene, right now, we're going to go back and listen to what's going on in court. Okay, the Nicholas Godejohn trial is on, and we were looking at all sorts of surveillance of various things, of the bus terminal, getting in the cab, the hotel. I got Gene Rossi with me. Gene, while it's a little quiet in the courtroom right now, our producers will let us know something important is developing in terms of this. The prosecution showing this, Gene. What do you think the value of this is?
Oh, it's pretty powerful to me. The defense, I guess, is that he has autism. He's mentally unstable. He's susceptible to manipulation. The video shows a cold, calculated person who did not look disturbed at all. And that's the thrust of what I got out of that video. And I assume when they got out of the elevator, they had just checked out. So that's what I get out of it.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. I think it's very compelling testimony when the defense in the case is essentially that the autism is some sort of form of diminished capacity. Boy, we'll have to wait to see the expert testimony on that. But what the prosecutor is showing is premeditated acts. He's showing the fact that he knows exactly what he's doing. He's able to have these interactions. He's able to flee the scene. He's got stolen cash on him. So whatever this, what he wants to argue is something that's diminished capacity is really not affecting him, or is not as severe as to affect him, is not to be able to do things that are rather complex tasks.
Absolutely, I totally agree. This shows that he is in full command of his faculties.
Right. Okay, let's go back into court real quick, and we'll be back on the other end. I promise you, we'd be back. Gene Rossi's. We're back so quick, Gene Rossi. You're not even ready for us.
Oh.
Yeah, I know. I mean, when I say we're going to be back, I didn't say we'll be back whether it's 5 minutes, 2 minutes, or 2 seconds. But we got to get to Gene Rossi as much as we can. That's our goal of the show. Gene, it's very important that our viewers understand that when a prosecutor's putting a case in, that they're doing it with the idea of what the jury charges are going to be, i.e., what is the law the judge will read at the end of the case. And just having a mental disease or defect, or being angry or being upset during the course of a murder, doesn't make the day. So a lot of people look at it in a layman's point of view. Maybe we could discuss a little bit what diminished capacity is under the law, because if you don't, you can't, the viewers can't really put this testimony in perspective unless they understand, like we just talked about, what diminished capacity is.
In December of 1994, I had a criminal tax case in White Plains, New York, and the Justice Department charged an accountant. And under the tax code, Title 26, it's a very high level of willfulness, mental state. And he was arguing diminished capacity. His defense was basically, I'm a disorganized, bumbling Mr. Magoo, and that I didn't have the calculated wherewithal to cheat on taxes, and I didn't have the wherewithal to cheat on my client's taxes. Diminished capacity, Bob, is an effort by the defense to say, you know what, this individual can't possibly have that high mental state of premeditation. He may have some intent, but it's not that high standard that premeditation requires. Therefore, it's diminished. Therefore, we're looking at second degree. If I'm a judge, I would err on the side of cutting the defense a break and allowing them to put on a defense, because you don't want an appeal. You don't want a Pyrrhic victory.
Right. And just so the audience knows this, the murder count requires intentional and deliberate conduct, premeditative, as you have put it. So this diminished capacity is not like insanity. Insanity, you're not guilty by reason of insanity because you didn't know the difference essentially between right or wrong. Diminished capacity isn't a complete defense. It's a partial defense. If the jury believes it negates the element in Missouri law of intentionally or deliberately acting, it doesn't eliminate, it's not a not guilty, it reduces it to a lower charge, typically manslaughter.
Right. And Bob, I don't have the instruction in front of me, but I'm sure for premeditation, it's a pretty tough jury instruction where you almost have to show a bad motive, evil intent. And if this person has the alleged autism and he was suffering from manipulation by Gypsy Rose, that could eliminate that element of the first degree premeditation charge and cut him a break to second degree. Could.
Well, so let's go back now to what a lot of our chatters in the chat room are talking about, is the idea, I think, that we were talking about before, why I wouldn't, as a prosecutor, I'm curious if you would, put Gypsy on the witness stand, because there's a lot of data the defense is going to have to show very manipulative conduct, a person who may, whatever the reasons are, have been managed and manipulated by her to do this horrible thing. And again, I think the jurors, if they hear that she got a 10-year sentence, that would be great for the defense or the jurors in that jury. When we talk about it all the time, Gene, on a compromised verdict, to say, you know what, we just don't see, we see her as the mastermind. We see her as the one who had the motive. We see that she used him. We're not going to give him something that's going to be greater than her.
Bob, you want to know something? I just thought of this when we had our quick break. I want to ask you this. Should the defense call Gypsy Rose? What do they got to lose? Their client already confessed on tape. And if the defense, hold on, if the government doesn't put her on.
Was that the president calling you?
No, that was the vice president. I'm at my desk. No, I'm serious, Bob. What do they got to lose? And I got to tell you, Gypsy Rose's 10-year deal is a godsend. It's a gift to her. And if they hear that she got a 10-year deal, they are going to say, you know what? They both committed a crime. It was horrific. They killed this awful person, Dee Dee, and she did do some awful things. You know what? They should both go to prison, but I don't think he should get life.
Yeah, it's an interesting theory. Of course, the defense wouldn't even, I believe, even contemplate that move until after they see how the case goes in. But, you know, we also have to remember that she gave an interview to Dr. Phil. There's a number of segments that are out there. I won't even get into Godejohn giving an interview yet. We'll do that a little bit later. But with respect to her interview, it doesn't really, she's basically talking about all the horror that her mother visited upon her, at least according to her. She's talking about how they went about and did this and why they did this. So I'm curious, you think that that could get admitted without having to put her on by the defense?
The Dr. Phil interview, I don't see how evidentiary-wise it could get in without her testifying.
Right.
But this is sort of like heat of passion. You kill somebody in the heat of passion. You know, a husband sees their wife having an affair, catches them in the act, and he loses his mind and he kills the paramour. We sort of have this. We have Godejohn, who's seeing how horrible and horribly Dee Dee is treating Gypsy Rose, and he probably built up this anger and he couldn't control himself, and that would negate premeditation, that his passion, his love for Gypsy Rose and his anger at Dee Dee and what she did, basically torturing and kidnapping her, that overcame premeditation. Right. I see this going to second degree. That's my gut.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what the defense is going to play to in this case. And we're going to go a little bit later over the interview that he gave Godejohn. And I think it was a big mistake, the jailhouse interview. I wonder if these lawyers are telling them not to do these things. I would imagine they are, but they decide to do them anyway, a lot of times to save their reputation. You kind of hear that in his interview. But I think there's some problems here. But we're going to have to go to a break real quick, and we'll come back on the other end. Okay, so that is the defendant, Nicholas Godejohn, being interrogated by a detective, police officer, about the murder. Gene, pretty quick into that statement. The defendant hesitates for a moment when she asked the detective, did Gypsy know about it, but pretty quickly comes around that actually she asked him to do it. What are your thoughts in terms of how this plays to a jury as it relates to diminished capacity?
I think it helps a little bit because he didn't just say he loved her. He said he worshiped her. And he does show that he's the type of guy that if he worships somebody, forget the love, if he worships somebody, he is asked to do something very horrendous and kill her mother, he would do it. And I think this helps more than hurts the defense's case. I really do.
Yeah, interesting, because what I believe that will be developed by the defense in this case, too, is that Gypsy, who by all accounts led a horrible life with her mother, Dee Dee, making her have feeding tubes and making believe she had illnesses and giving her medication and keeping her in a wheelchair in order to get money from charities and Habitat for Humanity houses and stuff like this. But Godejohn says at a certain point in time, she was extremely manipulative. While he loves her, he says she learned to lie from her mother. So you may have a person who worships her, number one, but by also with a person who learned a lot of manipulation herself, although she was victimized as a child for all those years.
I know, it's sad. The apple didn't fall far from the tree when it came to manipulation. Dee Dee Blanchard, there's no sugarcoating it. She was not a nice person. She was not. She was a complete fraud. And what she did to Gypsy Rose is despicable. But when you're hanging around a mom who's like that and is a complete fraud, a little bit that will rub on you. And I frankly, I don't begrudge Gypsy Rose for trying to manipulate her boyfriend to get rid of her mother. That's why that prosecutor offered a 10-year deal. He knew if he went to trial, he would have either an acquittal or a hung jury, so 10 years was a good deal. Going back to the video, though, to answer your question, it's not a home run for Godejohn. It's sort of a bunt single, but it has a net positive effect on the defense case of diminished capacity.
Okay, great. Thank you, Gene Rossi. We have a detective on the stand in the Godejohn case. Let's go to court. Okay, well, here we go. A little bit of a break again. The detective has his gloves on, so I would assume he's going to be handling some sort of evidence. You know, it's kind of funny. Back in the day when I was doing homicide cases as a baby prosecutor, we never had gloves. We used just to pick the stuff up and use it. So I'm wondering, you know, today you see this all the time. Definitely something different in the last 30 years in terms of how evidence is opened, and you could see and handled. You could see right now he's actually opening up the bag that had been resealed after it had been tested, I'm sure, at the laboratory. And he's basically going through the motions, the prosecutor, what he needs to do in order to allow that ultimately to be admitted as evidence before the jury. So let's go to court and see if we can hear anything, and if not, we'll be back with another voiceover of my friend Gene Rossi. Okay, so we have the jurors that are looking at some of the evidence, the gloves. Gene, the gloves is a big point for the prosecutor because there are text messages, as I understand it. And how do I understand this? I don't have the evidence in the case, but it was through interviews that both defendants had given to various outlets. And at one point, she indicates, does he, referring to an alter ego that he has called Victor, and she has an alter ego as well, so they refer to like the bad sides of themselves with these alter ego, and it says, does he need gloves and a knife, referring to the defendant as Victor, and he indicates yes, and then basically says he wants duct tape in order to muffle her, and she says, okay, baby, we have it. Those are text messages that are likely to be introduced in this case, along with, you see the gloves and the knife, as you indicated, that were provided by the co-defendant who pled guilty to second-degree murder with a 10-year sentence. So this is pretty important evidence for the prosecution, no? Oh,
absolutely. And this helps prove premeditation that even though those texts are unique, they're planning, they're talking about how they're going to do it, getting the tools of the crime. It's not a spur moment decision.
Absolutely. Okay, listen, again, this is really kind of slow but necessary testimony. So why don't we take an opportunity right now, while it's not really anything dramatic, to go to break, and we'll be right back. Okay, welcome back. Hey guys, this is going to be a little fluid for us because some of the testimony isn't going to be anything that's going to be that riveting or exciting, and some of it will be, but our producers will let us know when something major is developing. Gene, so far, team prosecution doing a good job, right?
Yeah, sure. Oh, absolutely. Very methodical. I saw on the HBO series, or that documentary, that prosecutor's a good person. He's a straight shooter. I think he's a very methodical guy. I like him.
Okay, listen, the detective who interviewed Gypsy is on the stand. Let's go back to court. Okay, welcome back. Gene, we got a minute before we go to some important clips here, but I'm busted, I believe, on the chat room, if I'm reading that right, I think asked an interesting question. Does double jeopardy attach on the plea deal in Missouri if Gypsy testifies for the defense, taking on full responsibility for the murder? She cannot be retried again for first-degree murder. It's a double jeopardy question.
Well, if she wins her, she pleaded guilty. She's serving time. If for some reason her conviction is vacated, it would be a double jeopardy question. But the reason she could be called to testify by the defense, I'm not saying that should be done, but it's something to think about, is she has no Fifth Amendment protection. She already pleaded guilty to the crime. But they could not try her again because jeopardy attached. When the jury was sworn in, they tried her, they got a bite at the apple, boom. If the conviction's vacated, that's it.
You know, and that's why prosecutors, when they do this, try to lock in that testimony so that if the defense does call her to the stand, they have as little harm as possible. Guys, listen, there was an interview of Godejohn, which I think is going to be, obviously, you guys know I always say it, jurors love to convict out of the mouth of the defendant themselves, and we were in the middle of listening to some of the information that he was given. Let's go back and listen to a little bit more, and I'll be back with Gene. By the way, Gene, congratulations as one of our new trial analysts on the Law&Crime Network. We'll be right back. All right, Gene, so we're listening to Godejohn's statement, confession. Is stabbed at least 4 times, he's indicating. The victim, Dee Dee, the mother of Gypsy is yelling for help. The victim is asking, "Who are you?" And she calls out for Gypsy, her daughter, who's in the house in another location, 3 times, and she was kind of yelping out Gypsy's name and help. It really, wow, I mean, it's pretty riveting testimony. You feel bad for her.
This is devastatingly bad for Mr. Godejohn. He shows a level of calculation and nonchalantness that is chilling. He basically said when she yelled for Gypsy, "Didn't stop me at all. I kept going." That's bad.
Yeah, definitely. And what's also of interest is when he gives his jailhouse interview, at least I noted, and let's see if it gets into evidence at trial, there were multiple occasions where they were asking, "What do you regret?" And only on once did he obliquely refer to the victim. Most of it was he regretted more about the fact that she manipulated him, and he's in the situation that he's in. And if I were a prosecutor, I'd be using that to show not only that he did it, but that he has absolutely no remorse for it, even after having thought about all that. So listen, guys, we're doing this gavel-to-gavel coverage. We're going to take a break, and we'll be right back. Stay tuned.
Something, Kate 98. I'm having an epiphany on your show here. There's a case called New Hampshire versus Pamela Smart. I hope your viewers look it up. It's a 1991 trial. Pamela Smart was a 22-year-old teacher who manipulated at least 2 boys to kill her husband, Greg Smart. She's serving life without parole. They gave the boyfriend, Billy, who executed the plan, killed the husband. He got 25 years. He just got parole 3 years ago. It's sort of flipping the script, what you suggest. And here's the other thing I thought of. When this murder occurred of Dee Dee, Gypsy Rose was 24 years old. Putting aside the horrible Munchausen syndrome by proxy and all that, putting her in a wheelchair, at some point in time when she was 18, 19, and 20, did Gypsy Rose realize, I've been manipulated, I got to get out of this? Or did Gypsy say, you know what my mother did to me was horrible, but I want to continue this fraud? I'm wondering if that happened, because I'm now hearing all this bad stuff that Gypsy Rose is doing at age 24. Mm-hmm. This could be flip the script, that she should be standing trial and he should be cooperating.
I know it's controversial because everybody wants to roll with the way it's going, but I'm just looking at it. Had this case come into my office and I was making the ultimate call, I would be seriously considering this a little bit different. Now, Addie from the Law&Crime Network is on, and she's talking about another important point that's going to be an issue in this case. That's the police officer's questioning, and that Addie indicates the officer, would have to have known something was not right with him. Now, I think she does, because I could tell just by the way she's asking the questions. I know how cops ask questions. I know how they go about it. That she's kind of going in a very easygoing, very kind of I don't know, a way that she recognizes. She recognizes this. But nevertheless, this is my point, Gene. If he is easily managed, for whatever reason it is, and easily manipulated, and that is Gypsy, taking advantage of that, it's really a great question. Who is more culpable? Who is more responsible?
This is a tough case. This should be in a first-year law class. Criminal law, criminal procedure. It really is amazing. I got to tell you, every time I look at this case, I've been looking at it since Sunday, my views vary and change. It's extremely complicated. Nobody wins in this scenario.
This is why you love the Law&Crime Network, because these are these cases that are in the margin. And in the end of the day, Gene, if me and you can be wondering, should it be this defendant, should it be that defendant, and we're people that used to make the decision on people's lives as to which way that rolled, you see that the law isn't from a textbook. It is so discretionary. It is so nuanced. A single decision by a singular person can revert and change the entire way a case gets done. Unfortunately, or fortunately, we have a quick break, and we'll be back on the other end. Okay, Our bad here. We thought that that was the co-defendant that was going to be testifying in the case. That was Walter Stanley. This is an individual called by the defense in the defense case, Gene. This is all involving this supposed fight that had occurred before that was supposedly the motivation, and the defense is asking him, so Muhammad and Corey, they go into another room, and look, you could tell that this guy wants nothing to do with being inside of that courtroom, but do you think his testimony was valuable to the defense?
Yes, because it plants the seed that Corey and Muhammad basically said, Mo, I want you to beat the living daylights out of Armando. That's what you get from that. And I don't care what Walter Stanley said. His body language said more than his words. And that's the beauty of a trial.
Right. You know, Gene, you are 100% right. That's why it bothers me when sometimes somebody says, well, you have the transcripts. Remember that case where they read, like, basically transcripts from, like, 30 years ago? You don't get the nuances, the way the person looks. In fact, the judge tells them, look at how they're testifying and the manner in which they're testifying, all as it leads to the credibility. But this witness was important for the defense because this was supposedly the motive, that Mo was called in, according to the defense, that Armando and Elder said, hey, we got to get out of Dodge. They leave the party, Elder and Baptista, who will later be called the defendants. They're driving down this road. They're at a stop sign. And guess what? Shockingly, Muhammad, who was called to this party, is now with his girlfriend driving, happens to be right behind the vehicle of the people that got out of Dodge, and then there's this thing where he gets out of his vehicle in the middle of the night with a solo cup supposedly in his hand to shake hands. This is the state's theory of the case, to say, hey, how you guys doing? You know, you guys at the party where I saw you, there was a confrontation and you guys left. Just want to say hi again. And then all of a sudden this, you know, he's beaten Muhammad and he's killed. Now listen, I mean, no disrespect to the man. It's a tragedy, but this is part of the defense's case, that the state's theory of the case, again, you picked the wrong people to be the defendants in the case.
I totally agree. It goes back to what you said about 10 days ago. The altercation in the prosecutor's version of events does not make any sense.
Yeah, and I don't know if our great producers have that visual, at least, and maybe they do, maybe they don't. But me and you both noted it's something you have to see, is when Elder is convicted of, which was a loss for the prosecution. All the big offenses were gone. He was convicted in what we've talked about before, Gene, was probably a compromise verdict of this high misdemeanor, which essentially led to a time served. You could literally see on the man's face as it was happening his disgust at the idea, in my mind, that's how I interpret it, that he was convicted of anything.
I agree. I totally agree.
So,
Absolutely.
Go ahead. Can you hear me, Gene?
Yes, I can.
Okay,
yes, I can,
yeah.
sir.
So, I mean, we have this right now. This defense is putting on these witnesses. They have a wobbly theory of the state's case. Why do you think the state, with just a common sense thing, that the two defendants left the party? Here you go. Here's the video clip. Thank you. You guys are great. Here he is. I think he's waiting for the verdict. Yeah, he's looking down. And at a certain point in time, you can see this little nod in his roll of his eyes, Gene, like, I can't believe this. He's not happy. He's not elated. He knows full well that he just got out of a state prison sentence, and most people would be jumping for joy, but not him.
No, because he feels he did nothing wrong, that this altercation, this sad death, occurred because somebody else started the fracas, and sadly, he died and succumbed. That was the look of a man who felt he was innocent of all charges.
Yeah, and
absolutely.
Gene, we talked last time, and our audience should know, just as a recap, that also the forensic in the case are really peculiar. This beer bottle that's broken there, they send it for testing but don't test it. The beer bottle glass is inside the vehicle. Blood is found inside the vehicle, up to and including the console of the vehicle, which belies the statements given by Wendy, the girlfriend of Mr. Muhammad, that this whole altercation occurred outside. Again, sometimes I wonder, you know, what the prosecutors are looking at in terms of being able to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt. We got to go to a break. We'll be right back. Okay, Gene, so the defense was asking questions. This is outside the presence of the jury of Walter Stanley, who's already on the stand, as I understand this. And he's essentially saying at one point that they didn't talk. This whole thing about this mishigash between Muhammad coming and Corey inviting him and pointing out Armando. But then the defense attorney obviously is in possession of a statement that he had given to officers previously and starts to impeach him or attack his credibility by saying, didn't you say before that they called you over and there's a guy that sucker punched you, some salty language, which would indicate that it was more of a hostile discussion about Armando. And then the prosecution, jumps in and starts making all sorts of objections, which I'm not quite sure I understood, up to and including where is that in the statement, which was shocking to me. I mean, these are witnesses. You shouldn't need the defense lawyer to tell you where something is in a statement. What do you make of this?
It's rookie mistakes, and I'm actually appalled. First off, let's go to defense attorney. When you are impeaching with a prior statement, you got to make clear what they're stating on the stand. And if you have something that's different than what they're saying on the stand, alert it to it. Alert that witness to it. That's the defense. The prosecution, I don't have a clue what that objection was. Absolutely. And what used to bug me as a prosecutor is when prosecutors would stand up just to make an objection because they don't want to sit there like a potted plant because it looks like it's killing them. That was an objection that was gratuitous and, frankly, very stupid.
Yeah, I'm glad, Gene, obviously we don't get to talk about these things prior to the clip being shown. And, I'm glad to hear you say that because I was kind of saying to myself, I don't even understand this objection. It doesn't make any sense. But to go back to a point that you had made, at least tactically, the way I would do it is maybe a little more aggressively. You say, oh, you didn't talk? You didn't, nothing about Armando, nothing like that. Did you ever say? Yes. Did you ever say that they came over and then the N-word being used and pointing out, or whatever it is? I don't bring the statement out. I don't say, did you give a prior inconsistent statement? I'm sorry. I'm just saying that a witness doesn't understand what that means, a regular person. I would say, did you ever say that, yes or no? And, of course, if he says no, or if he starts to hedge, now you got him on the line. Now you're fishing him in. And if he says, no, I never said that, now you got the statement. You mark it for identification if it hasn't been marked already. You show it to the witness. That's your statement to the police officer. The very words I used are a quote right out of that statement, sir. Is that not what you said, yes or no, right?
Absolutely. But I'm being picky, Bob. I wouldn't show him the statement. I would just hold it, read it, and if he needs that statement to refresh his memory, then I show it to you. Because you want to be in total, complete control. And that's why I wouldn't show the statement to him initially. No,
I would ask him the question first, right out of I would read it word for word, not from the statement. I'd say, did you ever say, statement's not even in my hands. Yep. Did you ever say, blah, 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 blah. He denies it. Then you're bringing the statement in to use the impeachment. But to me, you get it out two ways. But this is a judge, it's not a jury. I don't know really where they're going with this, but let's listen to a little bit more of the examination of Walter and see if we can make sense of this, myself and Gene on the other end. Okay, Gene, I think I'm getting a little clarity on what this issue is with Walter Stanley. It was said at the very end when the prosecutor got up there. I think let's get to the substance of what the defense is trying to bring out here, and that is that he eventually admits that Corey is drunk, he's belligerent, that's his personality, that in fact he did tell Muhammad that Armando Baptista punched him. Now, this is a major score for the defense because it goes to motive. I think the prosecutor's objection is talking about the hearsay conversation between Corey and Muhammad. Is that what you're thinking?
Yes. It's very confusing, but I think that's what it is, yes.
Okay, but nevertheless, this is information that, I'm wondering, as the prosecutor's objecting to all of this, if this kind of thing gets excluded, and certainly the judge will give the defense a little bit more discretion here, but this goes to the heart of the state's motive in this case, because it provides exactly the reason why the victim, Mr. Muhammad there, actually was a person pursuing Baptista and Elder.
You mean it's the defendant's motive?
Right.
Defendant's case. And here, this also explains that odd occurrence at the party when Muhammad, who doesn't know the defendant, walks up to the defendant and says, "Are you Armando?" Because Mo wanted to verify that this is the person that I'm going to be a muscle man on, either at that party or I'm going to follow him out.
Right. Well, this is a very significant piece of evidence for the defense. It's going to be interesting. I don't know the answer yet. I'll either show a clip or I'll find out from the producers what happened with regard to this evidentiary issue, because it's very important, and certainly the defense wants this in. This is the Armando Baptista trial. We're going to take a quick break, and I'll be back on the other end with Gene with the rest of this case. All right, welcome back. We are now going to go into the Godejohn trial again, Nicholas Godejohn. And we have a special. I mean, you can't get much better than this. I mean, I had the beautiful opportunity today of coming in, walking in the city, getting to the Law&Crime Network, sitting down in the green room on the couch to have my first person I see walk through the door, the special, effervescent Aaron Keller. And what we have right now is a report on the openings in the Godejohn trial by Aaron Keller.
All eyes are on Missouri for the trial against a Wisconsin man accused of stabbing his girlfriend's mother 17 times. 28-year-old Nicholas Godejohn and his girlfriend, Gypsy Blanchard, are accused of killing Gypsy's mother, Dee Dee Blanchard, who was discovered in a pool of blood in her bed in 2015. Prosecutors began their opening statements by pointing the finger at Gypsy as the mastermind behind the murder. The state then focused on the defendant, claiming that Godejohn was just as responsible for Dee Dee's death.
Outside of Claudine Blanchard's bedroom door stood the defendant, dressed in all black, wearing blue latex gloves, holding a knife. It was a year prior when the defendant, while speaking with his girlfriend Gypsy, was first introduced to the idea of killing Claudine Blanchard.
The defense fought back, countering the state's narrative by downplaying Godejohn's role in the murder, stating that Nick was just going along with Gypsy's plan.
Gypsy knew there was only one way she was going to be able to spend a life with Nick. There was only one way to get out from under the grasp of her mother, and that was to kill her mother. Nick arrived there at the house. Knife was ready, gloves were ready, tape was ready. He entered that home and saw Gypsy standing there, and Nick went through with Gypsy's plan.
Godejohn's team also introduced the defendant's autism diagnosis, arguing it explains the dynamic of the couple's relationship and Gypsy's power over the defendant.
You're going to hear testimony about Nick's autism. You're probably going to hear from a couple of doctors who are going to tell you Nick is autistic. He has a low IQ. He suffers cognitive disabilities. Nick wasn't able to formulate the necessary mental state to commit murder in the first degree.
Godejohn faces the possibility of life in prison if convicted. For the Law&Crime Network, I'm Aaron Keller. All eyes are on.
Okay, welcome back. So, Gene, Rossi, in this Godejohn trial, we listened to two completely different versions. It all goes back to what we said before. You got to know the law in order to understand this case in its context. The prosecution saying it was a year they started this planning. Prosecution's going towards premeditation, deliberate actions, opportunities to renounce the criminal purpose at any point in time during all that, purposeful plotting, knives and gloves, a conspiracy between two people that was executed, flight thereafter, tried to clean up. They knew exactly what they were doing and planned this for a long time. The defense, on the other hand, is that he went through with Gypsy's plan, and that he is an autistic person, a person who he says they'll demonstrate, which may have nothing to do, I don't know about any of these illnesses at all, or what constellation of problems he may or may not have, but he's trying to say he had a lower IQ, and that he was not able, therefore, to formulate the mental state. He is going right at the heart of the prosecution's premeditation and deliberation. In other words, under the law, dropping it from a murder to a manslaughter, and obviously they're going to need expert testimony, because from what we've seen today, he seems quite capable of cognitive functioning, answering questions, following through with the plot. What are your thoughts of the openings and the two divergent views here?
I thought they both did a good job with their openings. The the prosecution brought out that essentially the seed of this crime was planted in their minds a year before the actual murder. And if I'm the defense, I'm gonna use that and make lemonade out of it in this way. It took a whole year of manipulation by Gypsy Rose Blanchard to get that defendant to cross that Rubicon, because he didn't really want to do it, but he was subject to her power, her emotion, and control, and it took a long time for him to finally agree and take that fatal step, and that this is not a man who is a cold-blooded killer. It's a man who, in a sense, is a victim of a manipulated Cruella de Vil.
Right. So, I mean, all of us can be manipulated in one fashion or another. Some are more vulnerable to manipulations than others. And clearly, if the defense provides whatever medical information they are going to provide, and it could be, it doesn't have to be, everybody's talking about him being an autistic person. That is such a wide, general term, could mean a million things to a million people. But there may be other issues as well. And again, I get back to it, Gene. I would like to have been saying, and I would love to know the answer to it, and I've done it before, the person sitting in that chair as a defendant is the person who should not be the defendant. It should be her sitting in this chair. He can certainly say that. He can certainly say at the end of the evidence, you're going to wonder why the state chose him to sit there as opposed to her. I thought that would have been a dramatic flourish.
Absolutely. If I'm the defense attorney, I would make this trial Missouri versus Gypsy Rose Blanchard. And it would be all about her. Her. She got the gloves. She got the knife. She came up with the idea. She made him go to that movie theater. It would be all about her. She had a sad life, but she's 24 years old, and this is a lot different than if she were 15 or 16.
Right, and again, we get to that point where everybody, or a lot of people are indicating she learned a lot about manipulation, even stated it herself in her interview through her mother. So she's kind of like this irresistible force meeting the immovable object, a very malleable man against a person who lived a lifetime of torture and torment, no doubt about it, but also a lot of skills about manipulation, lying, and deceit. And so I ask, we're gonna listen to a clip that he gave to the police department where he's confessing very readily to this crime. And we're going to ask back to the chatters in that chat room. We asked this question before. Should she be the person sitting there and him being given the break, given what you know about the case right now? There's been a lot of controversy about that. Let's go listen to the detective giving the interview and go to John's responses to the questions. Okay, Gene, so that's the go-to-John part of the statement that was being given. And we've been postulating here who's the heavy, if you will, who's the more culpable. During the interview that he had given, the prison interview that he had given, in a very simplistic way, he's a very straight, simplistic kind of person in terms of his speech and the manner of his thought patterns. I don't mean he's not a critical thinker. He is. He's answering questions well. But he says, I wish I could get the 10-year sentence, and I think that's fair. She got 10, or if I could get 15, I think that's fair. So while we've been talking about whether the script should be flipped and she should be sitting in that chair and vice versa, what about the idea, if you're the prosecutor, you want to go heavy with Go-to-John, and you also know that she's manipulative, you go heavy on both of them. Why should there be such a disparity here in what the prosecutor's asking for?
You know what? Why did they charge them as conspirators in one charge? Because I would have them both sitting at the table and do a wired plea. If one pleads guilty, the other's going to have to plead to the same amount. That's what I would have done. And you know what, Bob? The more I think about it, there's something in the fact pattern that is missing. I really would like to dig in deeper between when and if at all did Gypsy Rose Blanchard figure out that her mom was scamming people using her, Gypsy, and was there a point in time where Gypsy possibly said, Mom, you've been abusing me, but hey, let's keep doing this? I'm wondering if that happened. I really wonder if that happened.
Yeah, I think that this case is great in terms of how prosecutors are analyzing facts such as the facts that you're bringing out there, you got to be curious as a trial lawyer. You got to ask a lot of factual questions, a lot of theories, test them out to see where justice is. But what I really love about this case is I don't know where the justice is when the mastermind, the manipulator, the person, she uses a very, this is kind of like a, excuse the well, I won't use it, but it's a manipulative statement when she says, if you kill my mom, essentially, that's the only way you can be with me. And that's
yes.
That's taking of it, knowing, as he indicated, that he worshipped her. To this day, he says he still loves her. So she knew, this would be my argument, one of my arguments in my office when we were debating the case, she knew she had this Svengali hold over this guy, and then she wedges that and manipulates it and leverages it to him and says, but I can be with you so long as you kill my mom. And of course, there's a million other options other than killing the person where he could have been with her. You have a person who may have some sort of disabilities or whatever, is easily manipulated and managed, and then you have the toxic cocktail, but she's the one, in essence, who put this all together. She's the one. If it wasn't for her, this wouldn't have happened.
Absolutely. There's a movie called The Manchurian Candidate where the mother brainwashes the son to do a horrific act. I really believe that she was brainwashing him because he truly worshipped her. He didn't love her. He didn't have a lot of affection for her. He truly worshipped her like she was a goddess, and he would have done anything for her.
Right, and as you indicated before, Gene, I think it's a great point. He's easily manipulated by people that are either in more powerful positions or in positions that affect his emotions. For example, her with regard to the romantic relationship, and this detective who's asking questions, doing the job she's supposed to be doing, and he's very forthcoming, you know, with that. So, hey, listen, this is a great case. We're going to take a break. We'll be back on the other end with Gene Rossi. Okay, so that is a detective in the Godejohn case that is testifying about items that were recovered in Wisconsin where ultimately the co-defendants fled to. Hey, Gene, so far we've seen the prosecution putting on pretty much in succession evidence from the murder, flight from the murder, cleanup. We have testimony from the defendant that will be coming in. They're going to the bus terminal. They're in cabs. They're paying for hotels. Now they're in Wisconsin and they're recovering these clothing items. Why do you think the prosecution's going through such a methodical, detailed thing about all the stuff that happened after the murder as opposed to just the murder itself, which they'll continue to do?
Because a lot of times what happens after a murder is more important than what happens during a murder and before. And what's crucial here is they've added a possible motive other than getting her from the throes of Dee Dee. They've added money, the pouch of money. Mm-hmm. And I got to tell you this, when jurors see a crime committed, violence, murder, and money's involved, it really turns off a jury. And they made sure they took that pouch. I think they called it the nest egg. Dee Dee called it her nest egg. Mm-hmm. That makes Gypsy Rose look a lot less sympathetic and a lot less of a victim.
Yeah, and what about the idea, or how would you articulate this as a lawyer, as a prosecutor, that the murder did not have to happen, the theft could have occurred still, if that's what they needed money, and they could have done the very same thing, got to the cab, got to the bus terminal, gone to the hotel, gone to Wisconsin. They could have done all of that without having to kill her.
Members of the jury, this is my closing, members of the jury, what prevented Nick and Gypsy from getting in their car, stealing the money, going to Wisconsin, staying with his parents, and calling the police and saying, I have been kidnapped and suffered from Munchausen syndrome by proxy for 15 years. Arrest my mother. Nothing prevented Gypsy from doing that versus taking a knife, giving it to your boyfriend, and going in the bathroom and hearing your mother scream till she dies. That's what I would say.
And not just scream in her name. when she dies in the process of it. Hey, okay, listen, great commentary, Gene. I agree with you completely, as I mostly always do. The prosecution obviously should be laying their case out as chapter and verse in the opening statement. Myself and Gene talk about this all the time. The importance of the opening statement for the prosecution is probably the most critical phase at a trial. Let's take a look. This is the Go to John case we had talked about. The prosecutor's opening statement is always one of the most critical, if not most critical parts of the case, because you putting it together, you got that primacy and recency. You want to let them know where all the evidence is fitting in. So what do we hear? Dressed in all black, in blue latex gloves, with a knife. And the motive he brings out is the love, and he wants to be with her. And the mom stood between them. And that he was able to deliberate before. And he was able to deliberate when he got there. And that he had two angels, according to him, a good angel and a bad angel that said some bad words, right? As you heard. And that before that, hours before, he was at a hotel texting. And we know those texts are about how to go forward. So he had all this time. That's what the prosecution's laying out there. Gene Rossi, I think he did a very effective job on premeditation, on deliberation, but all of the opportunities he had to renunciate, that is, to stop doing this. He had plenty of time to think. It wasn't something that occurred at the last minute. It wasn't passion provocation. You used the example before, shooting somebody because they're in bed with your significant other. The prosecution did a nice job laying this out. Do you think so?
Yes, because what he did is, openings are a great device and they're very important, but one thing I always worried about and I taught about is you always under-promise but over-perform. He was not over-promising in the opening. He was sticking to the facts. And the angel, I hope that's in his confession, because that, if it's not, that's a little argumentative, but that's fine. But he was very methodical, and he laid out each time where he had a chance to withdraw from this conspiracy, each moment where he had a chance to say, okay, good angel, I'm going to listen to you. I'm getting out of here. So I thought he did a good job.
Yeah, I think so as well. And I think that most of what he has said has been in the demonstrable record that I've been able to review in this case. So, again, he's trying to attack that diminished capacity defense. The prosecution, this is a clear line case. Prosecution wants murder. Defense wants to drop it down from diminished capacity to a manslaughter charge. We got activity in the court. We see the judge is probably bringing the jurors in, or the jurors are in. He's swearing in a witness. Let's go into court and listen to what's going on. All right, welcome back. Gene Rossi. So we had the DNA expert there. I've done this so many times in my career. I've tried murder cases without DNA, even though we had blood evidence, and then I tried them with DNA. And I find it to be something the prosecution has to do. But I just think the jury kind of looks at it and is like, yeah, that sounds pretty powerful. I'm not sure it's really understood. I'm not really sure I even understand it. How about you?
I didn't understand half of what he said, number one. Number two, why wasn't this stipulated to? Nobody's disputing there's blood all over Nick Godejohn, and there's blood all over the scene. Why did we even need to call him? And third, this is the happiest DNA excerpt I've ever seen in history.
Yeah, well, that's probably because you didn't sustain any rough cross-examination, because there wasn't really much that needs to be done, because it doesn't really go to the defense in the case. I understand why the prosecution had to put it on if there wasn't a stipulation, because you need to prove each element of the case, because the defense at the end doesn't have to put a defense on. In fact, I'm with Ashley Wilcott right now. She's getting ready to spark up this host chair, and she's right next to me, not on camera, but she was saying the same thing you like, well, it'd be great if we could just get right to the defense. Right? Rather than, we all know that he did it, and this is even more minutia, but the DNA stuff I've always found to be intriguing, because it's just really a question of, does it wow the jury or doesn't it, unless there was something improperly taken or improperly done pursuant to the procedures.
Yes, and also we had a murder case in a federal court in Alexandria where a little tiny drop of blood, it was very key to whom did that drop of blood belong on the seat of a car. So that's when a DNA expert was 30% of the case.
Well,
And,
Gene, to your point, I had a rape homicide prosecution that I did where, and this is where if you're really sharp and you really look into the details, because there can be sloppiness here and there was cross-contamination between stuff that was recovered from the victim's garbage can and the DNA supposedly that was going to prove that the defendant did it. They mixed the two bags together, put them into one another, and, it's brutal when something like that happens, especially when you need that DNA evidence.
Right, but in this case, I'm really wondering if the defense offered to stipulate. If they offered to stipulate, I would have just read a stipulation. I wouldn't have called the expert.
Right, right. So we're wondering about the expert testimony now. And again, I was just talking to Ashley about this offline, and I know you feel the same way. For diminished capacity, if they're going to have an expert that's going to testify, the centerpiece of this case is that the diminished capacity reduces it from a knowing, purposeful, willful, deliberate act to more of a manslaughter, in the range of a manslaughter. That is, that the defendant couldn't form the intent to do those things. It's not a defense that says a person has, and I'm not either. A person is of a mental disease or defect, or a low IQ, or has even schizophrenia, or has all sorts of constellation of other physical and mental, problems. It's whether or not whatever they have is scientifically documented, provable by facts in the case, and reduced the culpability from an intentional, purposeful, knowing, and deliberate act to something less than that because they were suffering from that condition. And the prosecution in this case, Gene, I'm going to leave it to you to wrap it up. What we've seen here today has put on a significant amount of evidence to show you knew exactly the planning, preparation, motive, opportunity, plan. It was all executed. So while he may have been taken advantage of, nevertheless, he's the one who did it.
I think there's a very good chance they could get a conviction on premeditation. I really do.
Yeah, and I think, Gene, we're just going to wrap up the show. Thank you, as always, for being on here. But to me, the most important thing is the prosecutorial decision as to who to prosecute, who not to prosecute, could very well be very different in another jurisdiction. Listen, we have to go. Thank you, Gene. The great Ashley Wilcott will be next. I'll see you next week, next Monday. Be well.